Hi, leadership students. This is the lecture for Chapter 6, which is Psychology 2, Communication and Motivation. In the previous chapter, we focused on intelligence and personality, components heavily associated with the field of psychology. In this chapter, we introduce two other familiar ideas commonly studied in psychology, which is motivation and communication. And in the terms of their relevance to leadership. So obviously leaders motivate, leaders communicate. Indeed, it's hard to imagine an example of a truly successful leader who cannot motivate or communicate, right? So we're going to learn about some of the ways these attributes may translate into effective work with others through motivation and communication. Over the past several decades, there have been numerous theories that have been developed within the leadership literature that look at different models of motivation. These models are presented in the following sections, and then we will look at the communication process. So we're going to be looking through a lot of theories in this chapter, theories of motivation and models. So it's a little bit dry. Well, I mean, still interesting, but these are, again, theoretical, scholarly theories. First one is obviously one of the most famous ones, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, devised by Abraham Maslow. This is a model of human motivation that divides human needs into 6 primary categories, from lowest to highest: physiological, safety, belongingness, self-esteem, and self-actualization. In his model, if lower needs are not met, higher level needs cannot be met. So you have to start at the bottom and meet all those needs in order to go up. So he was the original needs-based theorist. And you can see some of the items that are included in each of those categories. You probably studied this in management theory or in organizational behavior as well. All right. ERG theory, that was Clayton Alderfer. His theory builds on Maslow's theory. He says the 3 primary human needs are existence, relatedness, and growth. So that's the E and the R and the G: existence, relatedness, and growth. He suggested that we can do things to satisfy more than one kind of need at a time, and that our needs are not strictly hierarchical. You see the difference between him and Maslow? He was saying that you can satisfy more than one at a time, as opposed to needing to fulfill that need in order to move to the next need. And that it's not necessarily in that hierarchy. For example, a person who has an unmet relatedness need may still look toward growth experiences. And so for that example, unmet relatedness needs, which might be like a self-esteem need in Maslow's model, could still look for growth experiences, which would be like the equivalent of a self-actualization, so that you can actually, that there isn't that hierarchy. They're more simultaneous. Within this, there's something called the frustration regression hypothesis, the belief that a person who is frustrated in meeting a higher level need will seek to meet a lower level need. So frustration results when higher order needs cannot be met. Individuals will then regress to satisfy those lower order needs to get something met. All right, we have reinforcement theory. This is a motivation model that argues behavior can be shaped by controlling the consequences of that behavior. So there are 3 major divisions in reinforcement theory: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and social learning theory. Let's see if there's a slide on that first. Okay. Classical conditioning was developed by, do you guys know this one? Ivan Pavlov, Pavlov's dog, have you heard that? Around the turn of the 20th century, through experiments in which he trained dogs to salivate when a bell was rung, thus associating 2 normally unrelated stimuli, the bell and the salivation. The dogs learned over time that whenever the bell would ring, food was sure to follow. The application to motivation is that humans will be motivated if they associate certain situations with desirable outcomes. So beginning in approximately the middle of the 20th century, B.F. Skinner and other proponents of operant conditioning, is that the next slide? Hold on. No, it's not on there. Of operant conditioning claim that classical conditioning might be useful for dogs in primitive learning, but cannot explain more complex learning. So Skinner asserted that rewards are the major determinant of behavior. That is, behavior is reinforced behavior that is reinforced will tend to recur. Seen in this light, motivation can be thought of as finding the appropriate reward for the behavior that's desired. Obviously, this conditioning can go both ways. For instance, teachers have long known that praise and good grades, or in some cases, more concrete rewards like stickers or candy or opportunities to engage in favorite activities can shape a student's behavior. However, many students have learned that looking incredibly interested and asking questions, even if they're not, can help shape instructors' attitudes and perhaps even their grading. Interesting, huh? This is from studies. So the same operant conditioning dynamic exists between followers and leaders. As such, critics of operant conditioning, like Kohn, Kohn, argue that reliance on the operant conditional techniques, like rewards and punishments, is more about controlling behavior than promoting growth, and that the effects of over-reliance on these techniques can sometimes be counterproductive. Because he argues that reliance on prizes and bonuses as a way to motivate fosters a climate where individuals are only working for the reward, not for the good of others or for the company, perhaps taking shortcuts in order just to get the prize. Modern behavioral social learning theory has expanded on the classical and operant models to produce the social learning theory. Social learning theory first became a force in the 70s, and proponents like Albert Bandura suggest that learning is an active process and the learner has more control than classic or operant conditioning would suggest. A person's cognitive processes affect their responses to the environment. So in social learning theory, reinforcements or incentives can also seem to affect behavior. So in most complex learning takes place by observing others and imitating them. So that would be the social learning theory. Oh wait, why am I? Oh, I'm going backwards. I'm sorry, you guys. Okay. Next theory, Herzberg's dual factor theory. This is a model of examining job satisfaction or dissatisfaction developed by Frederick Herzberg. This was about in 1959. So the two factors are called, they're either hygiene factors or motivational factors. They're both. So I know it's hygiene. It's like a weird way to phrase it, but that's what he called them. Okay, so you might also see this be called like the hygiene factor theory. So hygiene factors here are factors whose absence he found led to dissatisfaction of employees, and then the motivational factors are factors that he associated with job satisfaction. So the hygiene factors include job security, quality of supervision, interpersonal relationships, working conditions, adequacy of pay, fringe benefits. If these factors are present in an organization, employees are not necessarily satisfied. However, he contended that their absence would be associated with high levels of dissatisfaction reported by employees. So that's what the hygiene factors are. So that, not that what he found is if those items were absent, those were associated with dissatisfied employees, that those were not present. The motivational factors, these are the opportunity for achievement and advancement, responsibility, job challenge, and recognition. Although these factors in and of themselves do not predict job satisfaction, he noted that it was unusual to find highly satisfied employees where these factors were not present. All right, McGregor, he came up with theory X and theory Y, Douglas McGregor. Theory X individuals believe that people are motivated primarily by basic needs and will take the path of least resistance unless pushed. Whereas he suggests that theory Y individuals believe people are motivated primarily by higher order needs. Higher order, remember that's back to Maslow, like the self-actualization, the growth needs, and will strive to achieve their full potential. So he really believes in two types of individuals, or like the theory X leaders believe this particular way and make assumptions about people. Theory X, these are the assumptions that they hold. That people inherently dislike work and will try to avoid it whenever possible. Since people dislike work, they have to be coerced, controlled, or threatened, or punished to achieve goals. People will avoid all responsibilities and seek formal direction whenever possible, and that most people place security above all other factors associated with work and will display little ambition. So he said the theory X leaders hold those assumptions about employees. Theory Y, according to him, theory Y leaders base their behaviors on the following four assumptions. People can view their work as an activity as natural as work is an activity that could be just as natural as work as rest or play. People will exercise self-direction and self-control if they're committed to the objectives of the task. The average person could learn and accept and even seek responsibility. And the ability to make innovative decisions is widely dispersed throughout the general population and is not necessarily the sole province of those in management positions. So leaders should constantly evaluate their assumptions about the motives of others. Although no individual is likely to be a true leader X or a true leader Y, the assumptions one makes can significantly affect the ability to practice leadership and inspire others. Okay, McClellan has the trichotomy of needs. Tri again is 3. So David McClellan, this model breaks down the motivation behind workplace behaviors in 3 categories: power, drive, and achievement. Power, drive, and achievement, and affiliation. So power motivation, those with high drives for power are characterized by 3 traits: vigorous action and determination to use their power, thoughtfulness about how to influence others' behavior, and concern about their standings with others. Drive and achievement motivation, let me see if there's another slide on this or not. No. Drive and achievement motivation, both followers and leaders can exhibit drive or a strong pull towards getting things done. People with strong achievement motivation have been described consistently as consistently taking responsibility for success or failure. They're competitive, they're looking for feedback on their performance, take moderate risks, and setting goals for themselves. By contrast, both leaders and followers with weak achievement orientations are less motivated by solving problems, are not as satisfied by accomplishing tasks, and are looking for easier tasks. And the third of the trichotomy is the need for affiliation. This is the need for belongingness, love, and the connection with others. Those are all components of a need for affiliation. People with high affiliation needs work well with others and may be motivated by that interaction. All right. Oops. Equity theory. Equity theory was developed by Stacey Adams. This motivational model is based on the idea that employees will be more motivated if they feel they are being treated equally, meaning that the rewards they receive are fair in comparison to the quality of their work. And that they'll be less motivated if they perceive they're being treated unequally. For example, if someone who produces inferior work is being paid more. So equity theory posits that people consider 2 primary factors in evaluating equity: the ratio of their outcomes to their inputs, and the ratio of another's outcomes to inputs. So, right, they're comparing themselves with others. Notice that these judgments are based on perceptions rather than objective data. So we have to keep that in mind. The problem arises when a leader puts into place policies that are intended to be equal and fair, but that employees see as preferential for some. This theory challenges leaders to consider the policies from the standpoint of the workers, both individually and collectively, in terms of fairness. Leaders will ask themselves whether some sectors are rewarded more than others, and in which situations resentments might be likely to occur. Equity theory further proposes that people will seek to equalize the ratios of outcomes, such as pay, recognition, job status, to inputs like effort, age, gender, experience, level of productivity. So thus, if people feel they've been working very hard without receiving enough recognition, at some point they're likely to begin to produce less, moving the outcome-input ratio closer to 1. So conversely, when people feel they'll be rewarded too much, which is very rare, they will start working harder so they can offset the inequity. Expectancy theory. This was developed by Victor Vroom. This model is based on the idea that successful leaders can effectively motivate others if they have a good handle on the followers' expectations. So the 3 principal components that influence motivation include expectancy, instrumentality, and valence. So expectancy is an individual's perception of the likelihood that their effort will improve performance. The instrumentality is the individual's perception that the likelihood that the specific outcomes will actually be linked to their performance. And finally, the valence is the individual's perception of the worth of the outcomes. So leaders can influence each of these components. For example, leaders can help collaborators improve their skills and ability, thereby influencing expectancies. Leaders can also affect instrumentalities by offering support and advice, and leaders can influence valences or perceptions by listening to others and helping them achieve the specific outcomes. All right, communication. I probably will go pretty fast through this, considering you guys take a course in business communication, and the communication items that are included in this chapter are fairly, I guess I don't want to say simple, but they're not. This should be a review for you, because they discuss really the transactional model of communication. So the basic communication theory is the transactional model of encoding, channels, and decoding. So transactional communication is the idea that all communication involves a sender and a receiver. Both the sender and the receiver determine the meaning of the communication that has taken place. Let me see if there's another slide on that. Okay, there's not. It includes, we want to think about channels and coding. So the channel is the mode through which the encoded communication is transmitted. For example, email, text, message, phone, in-person meeting, memos. Encoding is the process that translates the communication into a set of meaningful symbols, which is language, that express the communicator's purpose. Decoding is the process of interpretation performed by the receiver of the message. Oops, I thought that. Okay, filters and sets. These are both factors that affect how we take in communication. So filters are physical and psychological factors that affect a message. For example, we might hear the comment, "You can do better," very differently if it comes from someone we respect versus someone we do not respect. So sets are more elaborate forms of filters that describe a predisposition to respond in a certain way. For example, cultural sets that differ, such as bowing versus shaking hands. Interference, or also called noise, this is anything that distorts the message or otherwise makes it difficult for the intended receiver of a communication to hear the communication as it was intended. There are types of communications. Throughout history, the methods we use to communicate have become increasingly more sophisticated. We all use different forms to communicate to meet our needs. What we have is brief descriptions of some of the major ways communication can be classified. So we have verbal versus nonverbal. Verbal is communication via speech. Nonverbal is intentional and unintentional use of facial gestures, body language to convey a message. We often say that these are more telling than the verbal communication. Intentional versus unintentional. Intentional is communication consciously and purposefully delivered. Unintentional is the message that the tone of the voice or the context can add to an intentional communication. Formal versus informal, or grapevine. Formal communication, this is built within the framework of an organization and often follows a stated procedure. And then informal are channels that are not formally sanctioned or created by the organization but still emerge within everyday life. The grapevine is the kind of informal communication that disseminates rumors, gossips, beliefs, and sometimes are given more credence than messages from higher management. We have upward versus downward versus lateral. And the reason this matters is because upward communication is feedback given by employees to others higher up in the corporate chain. So your communication is going upward. This feedback can be given in another number of ways, like direct communication, surveys, memos, emails. Downward communication is given by managers to subordinates. So they include performance evaluations, memos, policy statements. This information must be presented clearly, and its relevance to the audience highlighted to ensure that it's not ignored. Lateral communication is that organized communication with your peers. When it's done effectively, it serves to heighten efficiency, clarity, and quality of information to further strengthen existing communication networks in your organization. Here's an example of the interpersonal communication process. So we have the sender, the receiver, the encoding, the transmission, the noise. Here's our directions of communication. Let me zoom in on that one. So here's our downward that comes from the manager or supervisor to subordinate. Lateral is the organizing communication with your peers. Upward communication goes to superiors. Factors leading to the breakdown. There are different ways that communication can break down, right? Frames of reference. The idea that senders and receivers may be coming from a different perspective, and as such, they may hear the messages differently. Selective perception occurs when people attend only to one part of the message and ignore the rest. So that can lead to a breakdown. Semantic problems are misunderstood word meanings. Filtering, we talked about earlier, it's described as a process where information is broken down from larger to smaller bits by the receiver. Filtering can take on a different meaning in the context of breakdowns. So instead of being a process utilized by the receiver of a communication, in this context, it involves manipulation of the information on the part of the sender with the goal of restructuring it to be more pleasing to the receiver. So negative filtering can occur for a number of reasons, usually to cover up for a mistake or trying to impress somebody. Communication overloads. Person just has had too much information to decode in a reasonable time frame. That's how I feel right now, right? To improve communication, here are some tips. Use descriptive speech. Be collaborative. Problem solving. Communicate with spontaneity. Demonstrate empathy. So try to put yourself in another person's shoes when you're sending messages. Promote equality within all levels of the organization, and try to hear all sides. So here's questions for review, and I think that's it.